Good evening, everyone. It's Nathan Hayes from Prima. Thank you for joining me tonight for our webinar on evaluating and benchmarking associate ODs. It's very good to have you with me. Couple notes for how we're going to run this. This will go about 30 minutes. And if you have questions along the way, just use the questions tab and I'll come to those at the end. Look forward to sharing this with you. As we get into this, by the way, I am not an OD, so I'm going to focus on less clinical concerns and much more on the numbers and benchmarking side, as you might have guessed from my role and title. Those of you who don't know me, I'm the practice finance consultant for Prima Eye Group. And so we'll go at it that way. And what I want to do is just give you some context for thinking about hiring associate ODs. And really, here's our agenda. We're going to do a couple things. One, just talk through assessing your practice's readiness for an associate OD. Ownership considerations, I think it's all owners on tonight. And then a couple of thoughts on how to evaluate the productivity and profitability of an associate OD and some metrics to be sharing with your associates as you manage them. And how do we talk to them about how they're doing and what we expect? So that should get us started. So first off, quick poll for those of you who are in. Let me know of those who are attending. Do you have associates right now? Or are you looking for your first associate OD? Or are you still in the phase of trying to grow and looking to add your first associate? All right, keep the answers coming. There should be a poll. You can just hit the button there. On that. All right, so most have voted. That's gone on long enough, I think. All right, so most of you have an associate. About a fifth of us are looking for our first associate OD, and some smaller percentage of those who are here are still working on getting to the point of needing an associate. I think it's good for everyone to hear this. For those who already have associate ODs, we are going to talk a fair amount about how we start the relationship matters, and so have some thoughts on how to kind of revamp that relationship if we're there. But the question always comes up, when is my practice ready for an associate OD? And so really, if you consult with me, this will be some review, but it's being recorded for posterity. So if you want to come back and hear it again, it'll be here. First question we always want to ask is, what's the patient demand? If we're going to hire an associate, and really for you yourselves as owners, as self-employed ODs in many ways, if any doctor is going to be in the practice, I'm going to want them to have a full schedule. So patient demand is always the driver of it. If we're going to pay an OD to be in your practice, how do we fill their schedules? And it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it has to be filled from day one. But it does mean that there has to be a plan that if we're going to hire for 3 days or 5 days or 2 days, whatever the number is, there's some plan that we're going to fill up their schedule eventually. So that's always the driver, again, whether it's growing at the associate because you got a big backlog, or if you're just trying to get free time and hand off your own patients, doesn't matter. But I want your schedules to be full when you're there for patient care. I want your associate schedule when you hire one to be full, or to have an idea of how you're going to fill the schedule eventually. Second question we're going to ask is about profitability. And I have an $800,000 practice here, too, actually. And $800,000 tends to be, if you wanted a rule of thumb, the point at which it starts to make financial sense to have associates, especially if you're still growing. Ideally, it'd be more, but this is sort of the rule of thumb we work from. $800,000 with a backlog. As an owner, depending on your goals and your needs for free time to manage the business or be with your family or do whatever, if you can hold out and build a practice to $1 million plus before hiring your first OD, I think that's preferable. But again, that's if your goal is maximizing personal income. If the goal is more around free time and lifestyle, it may be 800,000 with the backlog. So we got two practices here. Practice one's netting 20% of its revenues. Practice two is netting 30% of its revenues. And I just want to show how profitability drives this decision as well. And as you might imagine, practice two is going to have an easier time, because if we go ahead and hire a full-time OD or any amount of time for an OD in these practices, the first practice, if you drop a $100,000 associate in there tomorrow, they are going to struggle. The owner is not going to be earning as much as he might want. In the second practice, again, it's a big interruption to the owner's income to take fully, about a third of it out, but a little more than that. But there's still a nice residual income for this owner. And by the way, at $800,000, one doctor could be producing all of this. So both of these doctors might be coming out of patient care altogether at that point. So profitability is going to matter. Can you afford to trade your income before growing to add an associate? And the third question we want to ask, depending on how your practice is set up and what your goals are for having an associate, is going to be space. Is there enough room to put all of us in, if we're going to be working side by side at least? If we're just, if it's a $500,000, $600,000 practice and I just want to buy some free time and I'm not going to be there when my associate's there, not as big a deal. But space is a consideration. For a smaller office, it's going to inhibit your ability to add an associate before you get more space. Okay, and really a big question, and I maybe should have started this, is you start to think about an associate, or even if you have them now, ask yourself, where am I going with this associate? Why do I want to have an associate? And there's a lot of reasons you might want an associate. So it's not just, it may very well be to grow the practice. We've continued to grow our patient base. Either I can't right now, or I'm not going to be able soon to see all the patients. So I need more doctor time in my practice to see my patients. It may be that you just need more free time. Either that you enjoy the business and you need to spend more time running it, especially when you start hitting, if it's a solo OD, that $750,000, $800,000, $900,000 mark in revenues. If you don't have a good manager, even if you do, it can be very difficult to manage a full patient load and managing your staff and trying to run the business. And so you may need the associate just to free up management time for the practice. You might want to spend more time with your kids. You may want to spend more time fishing, golfing, whatever. And it may also be that you're starting to exit yourself from patient care. It's just time to slow down. You're not ready to give up ownership yet. But you're starting to wind down, and this is one of the first steps of exiting. And you may or may not sell to your associate. But it's something to be considering. Now, if you're hiring an associate with the idea that this is your exit strategy, caveat emptor. And this actually cuts both ways. So be aware, if you're talking equity with your associates, if you're talking about selling to them, they'll have heard horror stories on the other side. But what we hear from owners with some frequency is that hired an associate with the idea that they would buy me out. They got into the practice. We got to know each other. They saw how hard I worked. They saw the price tag and they bailed. And suddenly, the associate that was going to buy me out not only didn't buy me out, but left to go somewhere else. So if you're looking for that, just be aware of that. The flip side of it is many associates come into practices and the owner says, yes, I'll give you equity. And they put it off. And the associate gets very frustrated at that point. So just be aware it cuts both ways. And if you're looking for an exit strategy, and this is not the normal Prima advice, but one thing you might consider when bringing another doctor into the practice, especially if you're looking to exit, is you want to go into partnership. This is my partner, my wife. But understand that if you go into partnership for any period of time, you are very much getting into a financial marriage. And so some things to think about, and I don't want to dwell on this because this is about associates, but anytime we talk about adding doctors, even with your current associates, we should be asking the question, is partnership on the table and how would we approach that? So if you're looking to add a partner, and I think that to some extent, unless it's purely with the idea that I'm going to lock this person in to buy me out 5 to 7 years from now, they need to be carrying some way to adding value to the practice. most important thing I look for in that is bringing new patients to the practice. So can they grow their own patient base? Do they have a management skill? Can they bring a new specialty to the practice? And are they a risk to the practice, either because of their conduct or how they practice optometry? You have to ask the question: are there risks to having this person be an equity partner in the business? Do you trust them? We've seen partners defraud each other. And then as you get into that, understand that if you make your associate a partner, you're going to have a very different income picture to them, so they're going to get a substantial raise, and you're going to have to negotiate for control of the practice in a way that if you've had and enjoyed being the sole owner and decision maker for the practice, it's going to come into play. So be aware of those things. We'll focus on associates from now on, but the question comes up. So be clear on what you're trying to do with your associates. Is it just to free up time for yourself? Are you bringing them in to drive the growth? Are you planning for your exit strategy? And do you need to consider equity to either attract an associate to your practice? So if you're more rural, you may have to offer equity to get someone to even consider coming to your practice. If you want to lock them in to buy you out, equity is a sure bet for that. And again, all things we can consult on, but let's focus on, from now on, for the rest of our time together, we might come back to partnership a little bit at the end, but let's focus on how do we measure our associates. So, and I think we have to ask the question. I gave a caveat on this on the front end. Where's my mouse? But there we go. How do we measure our associates? Do we measure them based on the effectiveness of their patient care? I think the answer has to be yes. Do we measure them based on how well they get along with the office? I think the answer has to be yes. And do we measure them on how much they produce in terms of revenue? I think the answer is yes. And as you evaluate your associates and you talk to them about how the relationship's going, how they're doing in the practice, I think all three of these elements have to come into play. Do they take care of the patients? That's fundamental, right? If they can't take care of the patients, that's the job. The softer side of the job is how do they do getting on with your staff? And then, you're in a business relationship. I don't think anyone on this webinar is running a charity clinic. So, as I pop over to look at who's here, that being the case, there is some expectation that they're going to produce revenues for the practice. All very important things. And as we look at revenue production, and those of you who heard me speak before, you'll know this joke, but there is a very simple formula. It's a new formula if you've seen presentations before for generating revenue, and this is not it. But effectively, for our associates, for you, for any doctor in the practice as a whole, what are the drivers of revenue? The number of comprehensive exams, the number of patients we see, and the revenue per exam. This is sort of if you're benchmarking it, this is how we look at it. Number of comprehensive exams times the revenue per comprehensive exam. But said another way, really, is the number of patients seen times the revenue per patient. As you evaluate your own production, as you evaluate your associates' production, to me, these are the components we're going to evaluate. And one of the important things to think about for those of you, certainly if you have an associate now, or if you're thinking about adding one, make sure you have the systems in place to be able to track these things by doctor. It's very difficult to feel frustrated with your associate and not have any way of knowing how much are they producing. Am I producing more? Are they producing more? Or if you need to coach them up, if you don't have the evidence, if you can't show them, hey, this is what OfficeMate says, this is what Maximize says you produce, this is what it says I produce. Let's break that down. I'm seeing this number of patients. You've seen this number of patients. Your revenue per patient is X minus Y. Make sure that you can track these things. These are very simple, by the way. And you can call us. You can call your practice management software company support to find out how to track these and set it up. But these are the things you need to track if you're going to measure and benchmark and manage your associate doctors. All right. So here's something I hear from doctors all the time is, how much should my associate produce relative to me? Who should be the bigger producer? And I have let's do a quick poll. Just curious, and I think I already know the results for this, but we'll put it out there. In your practice, if you have associate doctors, so just if you have them, and if you have multiple doctors, you can give multiple answers. But your associates produce less than you, more than you, or the same as you. And as you're filling that out, there's a big donut on the more. The highest revenue per OD on an FTE basis I've seen ever was actually generated by an associate doctor, a pair of associate doctors in a satellite clinic, or a second location, not really satellite. So just know that it is not locked in stone that your associates must produce less than you. All right, close that up. There I am. Here's the result. 75% of you are reporting that your associates generate less, about 25% the same. And to me, as you think about how to what we expect of our associates, I'm always going to say that the expectation should be fundamentally that the associate produces as much as the owner. There are reasons why it may be less, but I think the expectation as you look at your associate is they're in your practice that you built with your systems. There's no reason why they shouldn't produce the same amount as you. So keep that in mind. And again, what goes into that? First off is the patient flow, and this is full load varies practice to practice. But again, if the associate's going to be there, I want them to mimic your patient volume. And again, there may be reasons it has to be different. So, for instance, you may be hiring an associate to be the primary care OD in the practice, so you can focus on a specialty and your patients take longer. Okay. Figure out what you do with your primary care patients and set that schedule for them. I mean, Prima's ideal, especially for practices that are large enough to have associates, is that you would be seeing 20 to 24 patients per day, the associate would be. And that's probably broken down like 16 to 18 comprehensive exams, so exams of refraction, and then 4 to 6 follow-ups or contact lens checks. Ideally, you only staff doctor time for as many days as you can fill the schedule. I understand that if you're in a growth mode and you're hiring a full-time associate ahead of the growth, that probably won't be the case. Our coaching will always be that if you do that you would, depending on where you are in terms of your patient volume and patient care time, that you would go ahead and hand off a couple of patient care days yourself. But understood that would happen. But still, try to match the available doctor time to the patient volume. And there's a question here about are we talking about on an 8-hour day for that 20 to 24 patients per day? And the answer is yes, that would be on an 8-hour day. Although there certainly are practices where the ODs are seeing 30, 35 patients a day, or even 40 a day. Some of those are more Medicaid oriented, but even in some practices that just tend to be more medically oriented, that patient volume can be 25, 30, 35 a day. One of the things is we manage our associates, and I'll share on a couple of these, a couple of horror stories, and this is what you don't want to have happen. And it's important to set expectations on the front end of your relationship, but what you don't want to have happen that I definitely hear from more than one practice is, my associate, if a patient cancels and the front desk is doing a good job of trying to fill that slot with call back on, they might go and say, don't fill that slot, just leave it open. But that's not the associate's call. Their job is to see patients in the practice. And I think you just need to set expectations there that they don't get to ask out of exams. And one of the questions too that we get a lot is, okay, I've got this new associate, they're not necessarily busy. Whose job is it to fill their schedule? And so let me ask y'all, just to keep everyone on your toes, whose job it is in your practice to fill the schedules? Do you do it? Do you expect your associates to do it? Do you share it? But who fills the schedule? Oh, it's balancing out. Wow. Oh, this is an exciting poll. That's not what I expected. I think we'll call it. All right, so the options were, I'm the owner, I'll do it, and each of us contributes. I think it's really healthy, by the way, for the associates to do it, particularly if you are an older owner hiring a younger associate. They tend to build their own following, and that may be what you're seeing, that your patient basis, particularly if you're a primary. If you're a specialist, it may be a little different, but if you're doing general primary care optometry, your patients will tend to cluster around your age, and your associates' patients will do the same. I think, notice no one says their associate did it on their own, and that's not a surprise. I think one of the mistakes that I hear, I consider it a mistake, is to hire an associate and expect them to fill their own schedule. The associate that can do that down the road, again, this may, depending on your goals, this may be a good thing, but down the road is going to justifiably want equity and control. Justifiably, I would say they should earn more. And that may be what you're looking for, but for our vision of practice, where you're using your associate doctors to free up time for yourself or lifestyle to generate passive income to the owner, I think it's better for the owner to take primary responsibility for that. Who fills the schedule? I do think it involves the owner. It's your practice. Fill the books. The associate, you let them know, ideally on the front end, but even midstream, this is the expectation. This is the schedule that we follow in this practice. You're going to follow it. We'll provide the technicians you need to delegate, the systems you need to get there. But again, the primary driver on associates, in the practice overall, is how many patients can you see? It may take marketing to fill the books for a new associate. It may be, as Dr. Gelmard would tell us all, it's a great opportunity if you're adding an associate to look at some of the second or third tier vision plans that you may have avoided yourself to fill their schedule. Bearing in mind that the cost to see one more patient in your practice is really just the cost of goods. At some level of additional volume, you'll have your staff. This isn't a full benchmarking webinar, but staff and cost of goods tend to be between 45 and 50% of revenue. So if you're hiring an associate to drive growth, the gross profit on those patients, in theory, so cost of sales, if we look at cost of goods and non-OD staff, is about 50% of the revenues. And break even on that associate, therefore, is probably about double their income if it's for growth. If they're filling in and giving you some free time, it's not quite the same. But it's not a bad opportunity if you're looking to fill their schedule and you don't have the patients today to explore some of those other plans. And the point of the plans is not to go and take expect-terra as reimbursements. No one likes that. We don't like that. You're not going to like it. I know you don't. But if you get those patients in the door, they have the vision plan because they have a job. You then have the opportunity, you and your team, even your associate doctor, to say, your plan covers an okay pair of glasses, but it's also a discount against this really nice pair of glasses. And since you're here, have you thought about getting a pair of computer glasses? You should probably use some suns along with your contact lenses to protect your eyes from macular degeneration. If you don't have the plan, you don't get the patient in the door. If you don't get the patient in the door, you miss that opportunity. So, and especially if you can't stomach the reimbursements on some of those, let your associate do it and coach them up. All right, so filling the schedule, critically important. Definitely want the doctors to be full. Consider vision plans to fill it up. And again, I think the owner needs to take primary responsibility, and the associate can play a role. And it's teaching them the profession as well. We all are in the business of selling our services. Prima is in the business of selling our consulting. You're in the business of selling eye care. And if the associate is going to be an eye care doctor, they have to, they need to learn how to sell themselves to some extent. All right, revenue per exam. If you have a new associate, this is the one I want to measure first because there's no guarantees that you're going to fill their schedule right away. But how do we coach our associates on this? I mean, first, just measure it with them and share it with them and look at it together and talk about it. Teach them the same things you know yourself, and that you're teaching your staff, that we need to be recommending all the best solutions to our patients. Don't assume what their budget is. We want to have a strong optical system. And the best practices, the ones that I've seen where each associate is generating at the same revenue per patient as the owner. Dr. Gelmard's practice is, particularly the one where the associates produce at a higher rate than the owner. A couple others, it's almost always because there's a really strong optical team. So if the associate gets in and they'll see the patient volume on the right schedule and hands off the patients in the right way, the optical will take care of the rest. Things that are unacceptable outright is I heard about an associate once, and I'm sure if I heard it once, it's happened more than once. But while the patients would go pick out frames while they were dilating, when they came back, they tell the doctor, "I picked out this great pair of frames," and the doctor would say, "Well, why would you do that? Your prescription didn't change. You don't need new glasses." And that owner, who I hope is not on this webinar, wanted to put a bonus plan in place to try to change the behavior. I said, no. This is not bonusable for doing the job right. That's just unacceptable. So coach the associate. We're not going to talk patients out of spending money. And again, discuss these expectations that we're going to look at this before you hire them, those of you who are looking at it for the first time, or start now and talk about it. And if you are talking about it for the first time with your associate doctor, and you're asking them to change what they've been doing, certainly give me a call and we can talk about it. But you might consider giving them a modest raise in line if they start performing on that, and let them know that if you can start performing, they'll be raising it. Or there's some modest incentives that we can discuss to sweeten the deal and just keep them reminded and give them a reason to do it. All right. So those are the two, in terms of tracking patients, managing their numbers, those are the two big ones. Just what is the patient volume? Bearing in mind that you have some responsibility to fill their schedules, they'll have some responsibility to fill their schedules. How are they doing recommending products? What's their revenue per exam? The one caveat on tracking revenue per exam is if for some reason we feel like they feel like they're doing everything right, they're recommending all the solutions, you feel the same way, and they're still not matching you, you might ask if your patient population is mainly presbyopes and theirs is single vision like me, that might explain some of it. So there are reasons, but anytime something looks different, whether it's your practice benchmarks against the industry or your associate versus you, we just want to ask, why is that the case? And then, is it something that the associate needs to improve, or is it just something that's a feature of their patients? And maybe it's not something they can change. But know why. You need to know what's going on in your practice. All right. Now, as owners, one of the questions that always bugs us, and I talked about the break-even point on associates. If you're growing with the associates, probably once they're producing 2 to 2.5 times their salary, you're probably breaking even on them. Another way to evaluate it is and I don't know, I should have had a poll question on this. How many of you, or if any of you are paying on production? So if you pay a straight eat what you kill, typically it's going to look like 15 to 18% of the total, the collected gross revenue for the associate doctor based on professional fees and product sales. I'm not a huge fan of doing it that way. If you're an average producing practice, it kind of translates to average pay, which is why it works for a lot of practices. But if you're a high performing practice, and this does happen, that well, because the owner does a great job, the associate doctor, through no particular effort of their own, is producing $1 million plus in terms of production. If they're paying 18%, suddenly you're paying an associate doctor, 180,000, almost 200,000 in some cases. And again, it's not that the associate's doing anything remarkable. It's just the owner runs a great practice. So that it can run away if you pay on that format. But having said that, I think it's a really good sanity check on how productive your associate is against their salary. So if their wage falls, and we're going to define that, one too many. Collected gross revenue, the production divided by their compensation is that production percentage. So going back, if it's 15 to 18% of collected gross revenue, they're doing okay in terms of production relative to their revenue. At a minimum, they need to be at 20% of their production. If we benchmark practices against the historic 30% net income as a percent of revenues, 20% of that is usually allocated to physician pay. But the thing to remember is that's just a sanity check. If it's lower, great. So, for instance, there are plenty of practices, even if they pay high average to their associates. Let's say their associates are getting paid $130,000, $135,000, $140,000 a year, but are producing $1.2 million. I mean, that's only going to translate to 10 or 12% of the revenue they produce. And again, they're well-paid associates. They're content. You don't need to pay them more to get them there. So again, this is a sanity check, not recommended pay for your associate. I had a practice recently I was working with who they were asking about these benchmarks, how are we going to measure our associate? And so they were preparing to go to their associate and say, you have to see 24 patients a day, or I think it was 18 a day in that practice, and you have to generate $320 per comprehensive exam. And my encouragement to you as you talk about this to your associates, again, depending on your structure, is I wouldn't set it that rigidly. I would be a coach, not a drill master, a drill sergeant with them. Don't get too rigid on requiring it. There are reasons they may look different from you as the owner, and be coaching them on that, but don't get too caught up. You have to remember that if you're going to make it a mandate, what's your recourse if they don't hit their numbers? So if we're requiring our associates the owner generates $400 per comprehensive exam. If you don't hit it, well, then what? Are you going to fire them? Probably not. And is there an incentive for them to try to produce more? Do they have a bonus plan? Maybe not. So again, I'd want to say, the expectation is, Dr. Smith, new associate, that, over time as we get into the relationship, there's no reason why I think that you shouldn't be able to produce as much as me. And so we're going to work together to fill your schedule so you're seeing the same number of patients as me. We're going to be tracking your revenue per comprehensive exam so you can generate as much as me per patient and go from there. As you get to this, one of the things that's always kind of asked, and as owners, I think there's an instinct that I'm motivated to try harder so I can make more money. So surely my associate is motivated the same way. And I don't. That's not always the case. Let's just put it that way. Some owners will put in an incentive plan and it does nothing. The associate produces the same amount, and they either end up paying them more for no change in behavior, or it just doesn't do anything. So when we talk about going into either a modest bonus plan or particularly a pure production plan, as you're looking to hire an associate, if you're tempted to put in, I'm going to pay you 15% of what you produce, just remember there's two-sided risks to that. One is that if you go that route and pay them on pure production, the reason that most owners like it is that on the front end, before the associate gets busy, the associate has all the risk to produce. The owner, if they don't generate revenues by seeing patients, you don't have to pay them. And that always has some appeal. But the flip side of that is, and we talked about it already, if they end up being wildly productive in your practice, you may end up paying them more than you had to because you put them on this plan. So there are some risks there. I will say this: if you have the associate that is, in fact, and none of you here said you do, but if you come upon this doctor who is bringing in their own patients, maybe they're well established in the community or really engaged, they brought a specialty to the practice, they specialize in VT or whatever it is, and patients are coming to them and they're actively recruiting them. To me, that's an ownership behavior, and it, in some way, it means that they are meriting at least of more pay, if not have a legitimate claim to say, hey, I'd like to buy in, and I'm contributing to the practice in a way that I'm worthy of ownership. Sometimes you can use those production pay formulas in lieu of equity and giving up control to reward an associate for growing the business without giving up ownership and control. Having said all that, at our last meeting, I was very thankful for this. Prima member stood up and said, hey, you know what? We were really frustrated with our associates, and we put them on a pure pay-for-performance production schedule, and their production soared. So is this always the case? No. I think the key thing is figure out what pushes your associates' buttons. How are they motivated? And it's not always money. I mean, they may be some of them are just going to be motivated to do a great job and be the best OD they can be. Maybe you can offer some free time or other benefits to them in lieu of just thinking money is the only motivator out there. But there's no guarantee that paying bonuses will do it. If you want to do a little bit of both, a plan I really like is to pay some sort of meaningful base salary that looks, $400 a day, give or take, so about $100,000 a year for full time. So the majority of their pay is based on showing up and seeing patients, so you don't have to, and then adding a small bonus, 1 or 2% of production on top of that. And the way I would do that is I would actually start with how much do you want them to earn? So what do you want them to make if they do a great job? 120, 110, whatever that number is, and then take your bonus percentage to back into based on what you expect them to produce, to back into what their base pay is. All right, almost done. We've gone about 5 minutes over. So wrapping up, Certainly, if done right, associate ODs are a great way to increase your free time, which is most of what Prima members are looking for. And if the practice grows with them, your income as well. So you can have it all. You can work less and make more using associates, and it's very valuable. If you want to map that out for your practice, certainly give me a call. We'll update your 3-year growth plans and plug in the numbers and do some game planning for that. If you have associates now, get some clarity. Before you hire an associate, absolutely know what your goals are. Why are you hiring the associate? Are you hiring them to add free time to your schedule? Do you have more patients than you can see and you actually need the extra doctor time? Are you looking for an exit? And it'll dictate some things in terms of how you manage it. So know what you're trying to do and communicate that, especially if you're thinking the exit is on the table, let them know that. If you're young and you're just growing and you're not really, equity's not on the table, don't show your cards on that. Let them know. Set the expectations for what the work looks like early and how they'll be judged. So again, particularly on this is what our patient schedule is. I understand you may not be full at first, but you don't get to opt out of seeing 20 patients a day. When so often as we can fill your schedule, you're going to see all the patients. We are going to track your revenue per patient. These are the products we recommend. You have some clinical discretion here, but I mean, you don't get to not recommend computer glasses to people who need them. You don't get to not, if you do like an MPOD or the xanthan supplements, you don't get to not do the screening on that. So this is our standard of care. You're going to follow that and set the expectations. You own the practice. Yes, there needs to be room given for their own clinical judgment and discretion, but some of that you get to decide as the owner of the practice. And then finally, figure out which buttons to push to motivate or facilitate more production. And facilitation means if someone's struggling to see a full patient volume, maybe ride shotgun with them one day and see what they're doing and ask, what could you delegate? What could you skip? We don't want to compromise clinical care, but you certainly don't have to do everything you did while you were in optometry school in every patient. So think about that in terms of working with them on the production, and also understand that money is not the only motivator. So it is one, and it's a valuable one, but not the only one. So consider that as well. All right, 38 minutes, so in a little longer than my 30-minute goal. I will take questions now. Gratuitous photo of my family for your entertainment. So if there are any questions, go ahead and type them in the question section. Either this was all review, which is fine. Oh, there's a question. Oh, the comment on my family. Thank you so much, Dr. House. All right, so if we're getting happy faces at my family, it means we probably answered everything. As always, if something stood out that, hey, that doesn't make sense, or I have a very particular question to my situation, my email address, nhayes@Prima Eye Group. Call us at the office and just ask for me. Would love to talk to you about your situation, what you're trying to accomplish. And really, I mean, the goal of associates, there's a question. No questions. That's not a question. The goal of an associate and really a Prima is to set up your practice so that you enjoy ownership, so that you're not getting burned out, and you want to and enjoy owning it for the long haul. That's really what we're going for. And very much appreciate y'all joining me tonight. Call with questions later, and have a great evening.